From Enneagram commentary to Asian myth and history, today we're going to talk about what I'm reading now, June 2023. Hi, I'm Library Lynn. I did my first What I'm Reading Now video back in May. I enjoyed it and I hope you did too. So today I'm going to do another one 1 month later. But today we're going to leave out my Sunday project reading because I haven't even had a chance to look at Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain since May. But all the other books have changed. Today we'll start with the morning read. I've moved on to Facets of Unity, the Enneagram of Holy Ideas by A.H. Almas. And I absolutely love this book. You may or may not be familiar with the Enneagram. I'm not going to get into the history of it because a lot of it is actually shrouded in mist. But if you look it up, and the spelling is above, you should be able to find lots of information on hand, and you should even have access to a free quiz to help you figure out what type you are if you're interested. It's taken me a long time to figure out my type, and to be honest, I'm not absolutely positive I have it right yet. The Enneagram is often used as a personality assessment, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I'm going to give you a link to a good book on that in the description box below. It makes a great introduction, but Almas takes a different tact. He doesn't look at this as a personality indicator, although it can be used for that, he admits. But what he thinks the real value of the Enneagram is that it is a spiritual tool to help you increase your spiritual growth, to help you get to know yourself and to better understand why you're here and what your unique path to the divine is. To him, the personality is just the surface layer. And if you want to get beyond that, you have to transcend it and move on to the spiritual Enneagram. So it's a psychological and a spiritual tool to help you grow. I've been working on this with his books for 12 years now, and I've read his books over and over and over again, and I'm just now starting to feel like I'm understanding a little bit of what he's talking about. Before I kind of got parts of it, but I'm starting to understand the whole picture a little bit better. I will tell you what I think about myself. I'm not completely positive, but I think I'm a type 4. If you know your type and wouldn't mind sharing it below, I would really be interested to know. So in this book, instead of using the Enneagram as a personality tool, he's using it to help you understand what your soul's highest ideal is. He says that there are 9 holy ideas that create the whole, and that's what people should aspire to be. The idea is that if you can get in touch with God or essence or the Tao or being or whatever you want to call the ultimate truth and ultimate unity, you can fully embody all the holy ideas by getting in touch with your unique idea that's most crucial to you. And the holy ideas are truth, love, perfection, will, harmony, origin, omniscience, strength, and wisdom. Okay, that's probably enough about that. So now we're going to move on to my afternoon reading. And right now I'm halfway finished with The Great Bridge, the epic story of building the Brooklyn Bridge by David McCullough. It was published in 1972 and it's an oldie but goodie. It's the 3rd book I've read by David McCullough. I've also read The Wright Brothers, John Adams, and 1776. If you're familiar with David McCullough's book, and I think he passed away last year, unfortunately, you know that almost everything he wrote is a masterpiece of American history. His research was thorough, and he didn't mind delving into details. And even if you hate details, the thing about him is you don't mind his books because he makes those details so interesting and accessible. For me, reading McCullough's books is like reading a novel. He reveals things exactly when he needs to, and he's fair, but he doesn't mind pointing out faults when they pop up, and it makes his subjects more human and believable. I've been putting off reading this one for a while. I read The Wright Brothers last summer, and I really enjoyed it, but I know pitifully little about engineering and classic physics or math, and I was afraid that this book might be a little bit too technical for me, and parts of it really are. Parts of it are over my head, but I just read quickly through those parts to get to the parts that I do understand and enjoy. I think I need pictures to understand how engineering works. Maybe I should watch a video on how to build suspension bridges or something. Maybe that would help. But he has managed to make the people involved engrossing and as the bridge, and for me, that's how I keep the pages turning. I have a cousin who lives in Yonkers, New York, and I went to visit her about 4 years ago, and she took my husband and I out on a boat tour, and we got to see the Brooklyn Bridge from the water. It was absolutely stunning. And the next day she wanted to walk to the bridge, but I was tired and refused to even consider doing that, and I really regret that now. I may do a book review of this book sometime in the future. Right now, where I'm at, they have finished the towers on both the Brooklyn and the New York sides. A monumental undertaking is an apt description. So now we're going to move on to my nighttime reading. I just finished the 1938 Newbery Award-winning children's book, The White Stag by Kate Sarity. I had read this book in the past when I was much younger, and I really enjoyed it because of the fantasy involved and the stunning illustrations. And the reason that I went back to read this book again now is because before I started The Great Bridge, between my last video and this one, I read Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford, which I'll pause briefly here to say that I'll definitely do a complete review on that book. I absolutely loved that book. I read it because I wanted to understand more about Asian history, and Genghis Khan seemed like a pretty good place to begin. And I admire Jack Weatherford as a scholar and as an author. But I won't go into much detail about this excellent book. I'll just say Weatherford mentions Attila the Hun was a historical figure that Genghis Khan had actually admired from the time he was a boy. Genghis Khan was born in the 12th century, and Attila the Hun lived in the 5th century AD, so roughly 700 years separated them. And when I read that, I thought back to this book and remembered that I had read it in college for a children's literature course, so I bought a used copy of it online. So now we'll look at The White Stag. Kate Sarity, the author, was born in Hungary in 1899. And when she was a child, her father had told her the myths and stories of the Hungarian people. She moved to the United States in 1922, and she was nostalgically remembering her father's stories. She makes it clear that this book is not a historically accurate representation of how the Hungarian people settled Hungary. It's a story based on national myth, and she freely embellishes it with flights of her own fancy. She urges the reader not to examine the story too closely because the delicate fabric may fall apart. Sometimes I hesitate to go back and reread books that I enjoyed when I was younger. And the reason is that often they don't hold up. I'll go back and read it and think, what in the world? Why did I enjoy that book when I was younger? But with this book, it's a little bit complicated. Society has changed a lot, and I'm surprised to find that evidently I have changed with it. Her language and her illustrations are still absolutely beautiful to my eye, but the glorification of violence and of conquering hordes sweeping through and taking lands from other people doesn't seem romantic to me anymore or destined. Sarity begins with a patriarch called Nimrod, which I guess is based on the biblical character. He was called a mighty hunter of the Lord. But in Sarity's tale, the Lord is Hadur. I do not know Hungarian, so I'm doing the best I can. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing these correctly. But the Lord that Nimrod refers to is not Yahweh or Jehovah from the Bible, even though Nimrod is a biblical character. It is Hadur, a pagan god. And this god demands sacrifice right off the bat. And as subsequent priests of Hadur insist, their tribe is destined to leave the plains of Asia and to take over the promised land in West Europe. She says they will leave the land of the rising sun to dwell in the land of the setting sun. This book reads like an opera. The illustrations are sort of like something from an opera. I think she may have been influenced by Wagner, although I don't know a lot about Wagner or his operas. But it's full of thunder and lightning and wild magical chases and moonlit fairies. And this does remind me of the stories in the Bible of the Israelites entering Canaan, the promised land that the Lord promised them. And it also reminds me a bit of the doctrine of manifest destiny here in the United States. I read a few reviews about this on Goodreads. People either really loved this book or they absolutely hated it. And quite a few complained about the violent content and said that it was unsuitable for children. And I don't agree with that assessment. For one thing, Newbery winners are suitable for children ages 9 through 14 generally, and I don't think the material is too violent for that age group. Of course, all children are different. And yet, there were things about it that disturbed me this time around too. And I think that's a case of judging the past based on our own standards. Sarity was writing before World War II and the invention of the atomic bomb. She was writing about legendary events from a time that was before the invention of gunpowder. The world was very different in the time that she set this book. The story follows 4 generations of Huns and Magyars. I guess I'm pronouncing that right. It's spelled above. And she follows them 4 generations down through the ages. Attila was the final leader who was predestined to take the tribe to the Promised Land, which I guess would be roughly modern-day Hungary. They're the only European country whose language does not have European roots. And after World War I, they lost 70% of their landmass. So this is probably one reason for Sarity's nostalgia for the nation's glorious past. I don't think war and conquest should be glorified, but in the past, it was a fact across most cultures, probably all cultures. So in my opinion, this is a strange and oddly beautiful book of romance and legend that should be taken for what it is. It's not for everyone, but it would be a good way to discuss war and its effects with children. It really isn't very graphically violent. It just says that they go forth and they conquer and they shed blood. It does talk about that, but it doesn't give gruesome details. There is a sacrifice scene, an animal sacrifice scene near the beginning that might be upsetting for some. So read it, with your kids, or read it before you let your kids read it if you're concerned about that. But the fact is that half the tribe was against war and conquest from the very beginning. In fact, the tribe split over this. The Magyars were in favor of peace, and they stayed behind in Asia while the Huns went ahead into Europe and conquered on their own. And the 2 final leaders, Attila and his father Bendeguz, were actually tired of war and were happy to end it by the time the White Stag led them into the Promised Land of Hungary. And it says that the people that were already settled in that land welcomed the newcomers. They only had to fight to get to it. So actually, in a way, I do think this is kind of a mythological story, and it has a lot to tell us about life and about how we approach things. But that's very deep, and not all children would be ready for that, of course, but it might be interesting for an adult to read and think about. Since I just finished this book, I decided to cover it rather than to talk about the book that I just started, which is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This book is not new, and I'm sure everyone watching has already read it, but I may talk about it when I finish it as well. I'm only like halfway through the 2nd chapter, so I really don't have much to say about it yet. So that's it for me today. My new book, Library Lens, Biographies, Autobiographies, and Memoirs, is on sale now at Amazon. It's also available on Kobo, Google Books, Apple Books, and through bookshop.org and Barnes & Noble's online shop. If you'd like an autographed copy, go to my website in the description box below. If you order one for me, I autograph it. So until next time, happy reading.